This is WOMM-LP operating out of Burlington, Vermont, 105.9 The Radiator. Good evening, it's The Rocket Shop. I'm your host, Tom Proxer, and with me tonight is Toussaint Negritude. Hello.
Hey.
How's it going this evening?
It is going great. Thanks so much for having me. Looking so forward to being here. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading your bio, and I think we've probably got quite a lot to talk about. It sounds like you've had quite an illustrious, long, and interesting life.
Yes, and I'll be 64 this summer, so I'm proving, I'm still alive,
Thriving, I would say.
trying to. But yeah, whenever I have a chance to talk to like a 21-year-old or 18-year-old aspiring artist, I'm sure the parents hate me because I'm like, kid, let me tell you, like do it, do it. Don't get a job.
Forget school.
Yeah,
You don't need it.
Yeah, do it full time. Yeah.
I'm living proof. Yeah, no, I can imagine a few parents have been cringing overhearing those conversations.
Yeah.
Well, we like kicking it off with a song. Now you're a poet, so kicking off with a poem. You take it away, whatever it is you're going to be playing.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna start with a poem called "Cosmographies in Bloom," and I'll be playing the alto clarinet along with it. Down a song flowing north amid the boreal wilderness of innermost transformation appears the realm of the soul rising mountains of the moon at dawn. Obliged by the gods down a song of stars and coniferous splendor, green's the calling of reaches higher than our shadows can modernly conceive. Down a song flowing north, rises the dawnland of illuminations, welcoming the innermost of elevations to passages of expansions duly received. Behold, such noble means of galactic introspection. Behold, each peak, each peak surrounding each surrounding peak upon peak upon peak. Behold, each bewitching reach. Behold, this ascension of irrepressible peace. Behold your emancipation from all dominions otherwise. For here is where your unconquerable wilderness glistens in the liberty your passion calls home. Welcoming all illuminations to the dawnland incandescence of innermost reclamations, unshackling the sages from the ages, long now blazing and found. Down this song flowing north, amid the boreal chicories, lining the cosmos from the astral floor, appears the realm of the soul-rising mountains, of the moon at dawn, obliged by the gods of blossoming cosmographies. Behold this land your passion calls home.
All right. Toussaint saying Negritude there with cosmography in bloom. So Toussaint, tell us a little bit about that poem. I mean, I feel like I got a few vibes. You painted a picture while
Yes.
obviously you were reciting it, but I guess in your own words, tell us a little bit about that poem.
It's definitely inspired by the land here, the mountains, the Northeast Kingdom where I live. I'm really inspired by mountains. I really love the mountains.
And so you live up in the Northeast Kingdom, so obviously a fair few of them up there. J Peak, I think's one that I think's a favourite up there. Mount Snow as well is around those ways.
Burke Mountain, that's one of the big ones. Yeah, and J Peak. And the great thing about the kingdom is that there are a bunch of like unnamed mountains, or it's such a wilderness up there. But I'm a Afrofuturist poet, and so I really and it's just kind of how my poetry is kind of shaped. But I need to scoot up closer.
For the uninitiated, could you tell us what an Afrofuturist is?
It's yeah, sure. It's interesting. The definition is evolving, but it's it has the name Afrofuturist, but it really goes beyond the Afro part, and it's it's like liberation, because it's very socially and it's an interesting mix of like art and liberation from like from oppression, and liberating yourself through your own imagination and through your own like visioning, and kind of like the practice of manifestation, of manifesting things into being, visioning, and I think a classic example of Afrofuturism is Martin Luther King's speech of one day my four little girls, the practice of envisioning your way out of a hellish situation.
I see. And
Yeah.
you said that the term, the definition is evolving. Was there a point where you didn't consider yourself an Afrofuturist, and because that term has now evolved, you're like, well, actually, I fit into that category? Or is this something that your understanding of who you are has evolved as this terminology has evolved as well?
So you phrased it perfectly. Yeah, I've always been an Afrofuturist, and I didn't really learn the term till I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago. but I've always in my poetry world, in my creative world, when I'm writing, I step out of present tense, past tense,
Mm.
future, and it becomes so kind of trans-dimensional that and it's just the way I've always seen things, where someone from 100 years ago can converse with someone of today or tomorrow, and just really kind of getting rid of a boundary of time and place, and then class and all of that.
We were speaking a little bit before we came on air, and you said you kind of a worst nightmare for parents when talking to a aspiring 19-year-old musician. And is it the fact that because you are a futurist, have you manifested yourself this ability to basically do what you love? And obviously, when talking to those 19-year-olds, you're telling them to do the same thing.
Yes.
Is this been something as from a small kid that you've kind of envisioned for yourself, and it's kind of come about because of this kind of mindset?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, honestly, as I look back throughout my entire life, I can see that yes, I've definitely been like manifesting the whole way, and I really don't. I say manifesting, but I think it's definitely powers much greater than me. But I moved to Vermont in 2009, so I've been here I think like 14 years now, and it's really been since I've been in Vermont that it's really kind of like hit the gas
Mm.
as far as really like living my life. Um, being growing up in San Francisco, living most of my adult life in San Francisco, it's always been an extremely expensive city. So a day job was always mandatory. It's funny, when I moved to New England, I met people who had like 5 jobs and all these like multiple jobs. I don't remember anyone doing that in San Francisco, but whatever job you had to work, 1,000 hours a week. So that was always kind of a bummer because it put my creativity on a back shelf. Working 40 hours a week or more, and moving to Vermont, I've been able to not have to be so stuck on a day job. But as things have gotten more expensive, I have a full time job now. But yes, I have definitely seen the fruits of manifesting, and I think it's really, and this is what I would tell a 19-year-old. And it sounds so cliche, but because I can remember people telling me this when I was 19, like, just pursue your passion, just do it. And I would turn to them and say, you know, my landlord doesn't take passion, he takes cash. And, but now I get it. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely possible.
As you said, you moved to Vermont, 13, 14 years ago. Grew up in San Francisco, but there's been many places in between that you've also lived. The Philadelphia, Maine, I would imagine, based
Yeah.
on one of your professions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Haiti as well, which as you were speaking before air, you lived there for like 3 years.
Yeah.
So could you give us the cliff notes of kind of where you've been And what have you kind of picked up along in each place?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. Well, Haiti, so I was 19 when I moved to Haiti. I had never lived outside the country. I was 19. I was as naive as possible. But it was 79, and, coming out of the 70s, Black Power movement, growing up in the Bay Area, uh, when I was like in elementary and junior high, the Black Panthers were, you know, parents of friends of mine in the neighborhood.
Hmm.
And my mother was an activist and involved in a lot of a lot of stuff. And, um, the 70s, San Francisco, Maya Angelou was living there, Sonia Sanchez, and, the remaining beat poets. And so I grew up in that environment. And when I went to college or when I left high school, um, I really wanted to go to Africa or to experience more of Africa. And the whole kind of back to Africa movement was kind of part of the period. Even if you couldn't actually go to Africa, you know, uh, people were taking African names and wearing African clothes. And, Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali. I only say that just to remind people because I don't know if people today realize how significant that moment was. When James Brown came out with "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud," no one had ever said that out loud. Like there was there was no concept of being black and proud of being black. Like that was a bigger breakthrough than landing on the moon. So when I went to college, I wanted to go to Africa, and I was always curious about the Caribbean and all of its Africanness. And from what I understood, Haiti and Brazil, but I think especially Haiti is like the most like it's the most African place in the Western Hemisphere. Um, and in the voodoo there's a special language that's used in the voodoo ceremonies that among modern day Haitians, it's just thought of as a secret language that only the Hungon, who's like the voodoo priest, just no one really knows what the words mean. It's just like some secret language. And while I was living there, the ambassador from Ghana came to visit Haiti and tour around, and he went off into the countryside to witness like an actual voodoo ceremony. And they started speaking this, in Creole they call it langage, which is just French for language. And people usually speak it when they're in a trance or under possession, like voodoo possession. And the Ghanaian immediately recognized this langage as just a common tribal language from Ghana that was still intact after 500 years in Haiti, uh, which I think that really sums up a lot of like how much culture has been retained in
Mm.
Haiti. But
Yeah, that's quite actually a story. I would love to get a linguistics take on how that happens, that it can be recognized 500 years down the line without too many changes, that it becomes its own language. That's fascinating. Um, did your experience, had you been writing poetry prior to going to Haiti? Were you writing poetry in San Francisco?
Yeah, I started in like the fifth grade, and I remember my English teacher. Um, this one English teacher who introduced me to poetry,
Mm.
and before that, the only writing I had done was like reports,
Hmm.
and I enjoyed it, but she always gave me red marks for being too flowery or being too descriptive.
Hmm.
And one day she was like, "I'm going to introduce you to this thing called poetry." And she gave me a piece of paper, and she was like, "I'm like, what's poetry?" She was like, "You can say whatever you want, however you want. You can write the words upside down. You can misspell them. Total freedom." And that totally turned me on. And I have not to gloat or anything, but thinking back to then, like freedom has always been important to me. I've always been turned on by liberation and total autonomy, total freedom, and that's what that page gave me.
It's quite, I would say, a modern way of teaching poetry. I think I remember poetry of limericks and a haiku and maybe a little bit of Shakespeare thrown in there. I was never given a page and just told I could do whatever I like, and I can imagine being taught poetry that way just blew open the doors in your mind. Was from then were you just scribbling in notebooks forevermore?
Exactly, exactly, and I'm so glad she did introduce it that way because I had been really I had felt so disconnected from like the Shakespeare and the traditional poetry that we were given, all like ancient stuff.
Mm.
And here I am, a kid in San Francisco. They could have given me some
Walt Whitman or something.
Ginsberg
Yeah.
or contemporary San
Mm.
Francisco poets. But and when I was poet laureate in so I was poet laureate of the town of Belfast, Maine. Some people think I was laureate of the state. No, I don't want to. Maybe one day, but um, you know, I'll debut this here. But I am currently preparing to campaign because apparently you have to actually campaign to be the next Vermont poet laureate.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Uh,
What an exclusive.
yeah, so there's exclusive. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting experience. But when I was poet laureate in Maine, um, my main goal was to in connecting poetry to the people, to the community, taking it off that glass pedestal, that academic and snobby, and you know break that to bits
Mm.
and really try to encourage local people to use their own voices. Tell your story in a poem and your voice, however it is. Um, you know, it it didn't hurt Bob Dylan.
True. Um, for the uninitiated, what is a poet laureate, and what is the job of a poet laureate?
Uh, to share poetry, to encourage poets. I really lean more on that part
Mm.
of encouraging all the poets of your community, um, making poetry more accessible, um, not just literally, but content wise. Um, I'm definitely a huge proponent of um, poetry that's inclusive
Mm.
of all voices, all you know people of society. So yeah, that's basically it. It's not a paid position, but you're just like an ambassador for poetry.
I love that we still have that as a role in society. To be honest, I feel like that could have been something that got taken away from us by Reagan or something, but instead we still hold this esteemed position in our communities, which I think is fantastic.
I'm so glad, and I'm reminded of how um, how poets have been killed.
Hmm.
How that it is such a powerful voice, and I'm glad that I still have the freedom as an American to sit here and share poetry, but I'm also mindful that um, if we were living under the McCarthy era,
Hmm.
um, you know, we all might be in jail.
Most likely.
Yeah, yeah,
I would have been outed as a red a long time ago, I
yeah,
think.
yeah.
Well, we'd love to hear another poem.
Okay,
So, well, yeah, what's coming up next?
okay. Just have to choose a poem. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, this next poem is called "In Pots Big as Human Dignity." This is definitely a time shifting Afrofuturist poem. Once upon a time, there will be this thing called freedom. Oh, if I could only show you the view from there. Liberation for as far as your soul can see. We'll all be loving all the love we please. Once upon a time, there will be this thing called freedom. By this point, folks will have consciously obliterated all forms of bigotry a long, long time ago. No presumption of supremacy shall ever be allowed there. Once upon a time, there will be this thing called freedom. We will know this to be true because we have always known this to be true. As is the artistry of the horn of the moon, the handiwork of our liberation shall be painted clear across our lives in all the spectral hues of translucent transformation, transcendentally raising all ascendant affirmations. Once upon a time, there will be this thing called freedom, liberation for as far as your soul can see. In pots big as human dignity, folks will be cooking up radicalizations of things that today we couldn't even think to believe. There will be jazz and beats of people dancing in the streets. Folks will be so free, so free. Folks will be so free, won't nobody remember any other way to be. Oh, if I could only show you the view from there.
In pots as big as human dignity, thereby Toussaint say negritude. I didn't know quite what you meant when you said about the tenses, and I think that's such a great poem that showcases that. I think the phrase "Once upon a time there will be" will stay indelibly in my head from now on.
Yes.
Is this a theme that runs through a lot of your poetry? This kind of present, past, future tense
Yes.
combined.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It just makes sense to me. It's the older I get, it's becoming more of a reality. I'm not crazy, but it's becoming more of a reality than the one we know.
Yeah. I feel like your poetry is kind of scattered, or it seems to me from the two poems I've heard so far, scattered with this kind of metaphysics theme. There's definitely space and cosmology goes into this as well as freedom. How do those two interact for you? Why do those two things appear on the same page?
It's always just clicked for me, and I think also kind of tying back to my childhood and just the period of like the 70s that was psychedelic, um, you know, Earth, Wind, and Fire, with the name Earth, Wind, and Fire, Parliament, Mothership Connection, and I've always loved space and stars, and I've always been curious about it, and so yeah, it's just something that's always kind of connected for me.
And then obviously another big element of your work is nature. And I can't help but think that you're in San Francisco, not exactly big on nature, it's a huge big city.
Yeah,
And then you're also in Philadelphia, which again, great city, but still a city.
yeah,
And so it seems you've kind of you've led these kind of this double life of living in like very bustling metropolises, or
yeah.
really out in the sticks,
I
really out in
know
nature.
it cracks me up, just looking at myself sometimes, like when I'm like splitting wood all winter, and even what did I know about splitting wood in San Francisco? But yeah, it works for me. Um, I've been in Vermont so long; it's been a while since I've been back in a city. But I still love cities and still enjoy them. Um, as much as I've adapted to Vermont, I still carry a lot of city in me, and there's a lot that I appreciate about cities so much. I think culturally, cities can be so rich, but yeah,
How does it affect your poetry from one setting or the other? I mean, obviously you've been in Vermont now for 14 years, so probably fairly used to it at this point. But did you notice when you were younger that the style of your poetry would change in one place or the other?
yes. I remember like during the 90s in San Francisco, um, I didn't start playing the clarinet till I was 30, like right after my 30th birthday, which was really like old to take on an instrument, and I didn't have any confidence or faith in it. I was very happy at that point of of being a music lover who doesn't play music. I was and that was totally fine with me, and I really enjoyed listening. But I was listening to a lot of Coltrane, and then got introduced to Eric Dolphy, who played the bass clarinet, and that really challenged me to get into the clarinet. But as relates to my poetry, living in the city, a lot of the poetry I was writing then, it was an interesting mix of both, street imagery, street concrete, urban imagery with nature. Because as urban and gritty as San Francisco is, it's kind of unique in that it's surrounded by like Northern California. So it's surrounded by redwoods, which are instantly mystical and spiritual, and mountains, coastal mountains, and then the Sierras. And as a kid, my mother had like a weekend ritual of taking my brother and I, like, we'd take a drive somewhere to one of the state parks or somewhere, get out of the city, and I just loved it. As much as I considered myself a city person and enjoyed the city, I always loved the woods and mountains. And from San Francisco, like from some of the, it's a really hilly city, and there are a lot of hilltop parks. And from a lot of these parks, you can look across the bay and see like mountains, which was really beautiful. So I, yeah, kind of had this almost like schizophrenic like appreciation of both nature and the city. And for all the love of the city, it is chaotic, and especially as an artist, like there was, I always had to have 10 roommates because it was so expensive.
Hmm.
So there was no concept of like a quiet space to write or work on anything. And so I found myself like, going deep into Golden Gate Park, the big park in town, or, taking the bus outside of town. I figured out how to take like multiple buses to get to the redwoods, like around Santa Cruz, and I'd spend the day in the redwoods. But yeah, so
Is that what then eventually, decades later, drew you to the Northeast Kingdom? It was
yes,
like you were finally ready to actually settle within
yes,
that nature?
that's exactly it. Because my my adult goal in California was to move up to the Sierras. Like, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to live in the Sierra Mountains in a cabin, and that was my goal. And when I moved to Philly, and I was there for 3 years, and then I was ready to go back to San Francisco and maybe work towards that goal. And but then, having been on the East Coast for a few years, I really kind of got into it. I got into the seasons. I didn't really want to give that up. I love winter. I know, which is weird. I'm not a hot weathered person. That little heat wave we had last week, I was cussing by the second
Oh
day.
no,
Yeah,
seriously.
like I'm not a hot. I specifically moved to the most northern part of the state, assuming that I would like get rid of summer. But
You have to move a bit further north to get completely rid of summer, but at
I
least it's a
know
lot shorter.
exactly. But yeah, when I was in Philly, I took the train up to Vermont just to check it out, just for a weekend, and I stayed with a friend in Burlington. And as soon as the train was going, up up the Green Mountains, it reminded me so much of Northern California. And I was like, this is the perfect compromise, because At that point, rents were already at like the 2,000 a month level, which was like ridiculous. Now they're like 3,000 a month. And I thought, Vermont, oh, I can get a 5-bedroom apartment for $20 a month.
I wish.
That exactly that was my thought. I was like, nobody knows about Vermont. Like, I had found some hidden gold mine, but that was it, and I've been here ever since.
Oh, that's fantastic. My partner actually grew up in the Northeast Kingdom.
Oh,
So yeah, near Glover,
okay.
which I know you have some interaction with because you've also performed at Bread and Puppet, which
Yeah.
must have been a really interesting experience. They incorporate a lot of poetry into their performances.
I love it, and I love bread and puppets.
Is that how you were? Did you perform within one of their performances, or did you perform like as a solo artist for them, or for like a special showcase or something?
Well, yeah, on my own, but I've been kind of like a long-term like guest of Bread and Puppets. I've never been an official member, but when I first moved to Vermont, I landed in St. Johnsbury, and I worked at Catamount Arts. And after like the first year in St. J, I was like, I need to get to the woods, and because being a city person, you know, uh, city people hate small towns, and but I love the country. I love the woods, kind of like the two extremes of it's either Manhattan or the kingdom,
Yeah.
but nothing in between. And so I ended up finding this great cabin up in Sheffield, right near Glover, and and I ended up hanging out at Bread and Puppets because suddenly, I'm a gay man, and suddenly I'm seeing like other queer people, seeing like a few people of color, which is refreshing. But they definitely seem to be like my tribe, and that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we've just chatted on and on and on, and I've
yeah.
not really let you speak very much poetry. We've got about time for one more poem.
Okay,
If you could please kind of play us out, I guess, in a way.
okay, okay. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, thank you. Okay, this last poem I'm going to do is called Like Alice in the Garden of a Satchidananda Dream. And the title is inspired by Alice Coltrane, one of my favorite artists, pianist, and jazz harpist. I definitely recommend Alice if you haven't heard her. So this is Like Alice in the Garden of a Satchidananda Dream. Green, 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 green as the day, green, green, green as the day before Columbus, green, 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 green as the day before Columbus, like Perseids in perpetuity. Green, green as hallelujahs in bloom. Green, 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 green. The orishas of our fruition shall conjure beyond known bounds of comprehension like melodies and receptivity. Green, 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 green as galaxies in profusion, like orbs of Dolphy and connectivity. Ours is a Dogon cosmology in defiance of all colonization, leaping, leaping skies and seeds of wizardry, leaping skies and seeds of wizardry. We are that crystalline dignity, impervious to monoscopic conclusions, shifting the consciousness, shifting the consciousness, shifting the consciousness. Shifting the consciousness like emissaries in perpetuity, like the Aphronicity of Obatala on a far northern street, like the frontiers of infinity, shifting the consciousness like Alice in the garden of a Satchidananda dream, keeping, leaping whole categories. We are green as galaxies in profusion, shifting the consciousness, like Alice in a Satchidananda dream.
All right. Like Alice in the Garden of a Satchidananda Dream by Toussaint Saint Negritude. Thank you so much for coming in. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Before I wrap up for the evening, could you let us know, one, how do we help you become Poet Laureate of Vermont? And second, if people want to come see you perform, where does one do that?
Apparently, to become laureate in the state, you just have to have a whole bunch of people nominate you.
All right.
So, and it's the Vermont Arts Council that does it. So, yeah, send them an email saying, yeah. It's awkward to campaign for myself.
No,
but
I totally get it. But I'm sure everyone in here will send across a quick email.
I appreciate it. And the next show I have, sorry, I don't have the date. I can email it to you, but at a venue that'll be new to me. Sounds like a great venue in Bellows Falls. It's a real listening room. There, nothing is served. There are no drinks. It's just a room for music. So I'm looking forward to that. And then actually in Glover, the town of Glover is having, I think, what they're calling a Freedom Festival in July. And I'll be performing there. And it's a great thing, great credit to the town of Glover. It's there's some sort of multicultural committee of Glover, and this festival is their attempt to literally bring BIPOC performance to Glover and kind of introduce the people to some culture beyond Glover,
Excellent.
which is good.
You also have a website,
Yes.
Toussaint.negritude.com, and you can find that on the Big Heavy Word website
Yes.
if you can't spell it, because it is quite a lot of letters.
Yeah, it's my full name, Toussaint, and then ST for Saint, no dot, no period, all lowercase, Negritude.com.
Some good performances on there as well. Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. I'm going to look across the bob to find out who we have next week because it's not on the website.
We have to ask your aunt.
And I will. So tune in next week. Tune in next week, where you'll find out, as will I, who we've got coming on in the studio. But we do have a show. But that is all we have for tonight. This has been WOMM LP operating out of Burlington, Vermont, 105.9 The Radiator. It's been The Rocket Shop. I've been your host, Tom Proctor, and good night. Woo!
That was good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That was fantastic.